The Moldavian Revolution of 1848 was an unsuccessful Romanian liberal and romantic nationalist revolt in the Principality of Moldavia, part of the revolutions of 1848, and closely connected with the successful uprising in Wallachia. It sought to overturn the administration imposed by Imperial Russian authorities under the Regulamentul Organic regime. Led by a group of young intellectuals, it was quickly suppressed. This was despite the fact that the Moldavian revolutionaries were more moderate and willing to compromise in the demands for reforms than their Wallachian counterparts. As Moldavian political and social life continued to be dominated by a landed, conservative aristocracy, with the middle class still embryonic background. In Moldavia, the boyars, from whose lower ranks the revolutionaries would be drawn, had come into sharp conflict with Prince Mihail Sturza, objecting to his authoritarianism and failure to consult them, with some desiring the throne for themselves. They denounced him to St. Petersburg and Istanbul, forming plots in the General Assembly. But as they were internally divided and lacked popular support, Sturza remained unconcerned at these flare-ups. The peasantry was also aggrieved, and between 1846 and 1848 opposition to Sturza intensified. The commercial and industrial associations of ISI in 1846 protested against the prince's plan to raise taxes again. In several rural areas, small and middle-sized landlords objected to paying the additional taxes, and the summer of 1847 saw sharp contests in several duties by liberal boyars for seats in the General Assembly. Peasants in Moldavia and Wallachia refused to perform labor services, with violence and flight abroad increasing in autumn 1847 and the next spring. Eager for change, intellectuals were aroused by the February Revolution in Paris, where a number of them were studying. Course of events. ISI Moldavian revolutionaries arrived in ISI after violence had broken out in Wallachia. On the 8th of April 1848, a few great boyars opposed to Sturza, younger liberal boyars, and representatives of the middle class and other urban classes, perhaps 1,000 in all, met in the Hotel Petersburg to decide on a course of action. This meeting was the culmination of several weeks of small private gatherings and several public manifestos denouncing despotism, all occasioned by news of the events in Paris, Vienna and Berlin. Moderates prevailed, persuading the gathering to support a petition to the prince setting forth all the grievances and proposing suitable reforms. They also agreed to dissolve their assembly and all other associations right after delivering the petition. Such caution seems principally to have been inspired by fear that the urban lower classes and peasantry would push the protest movement to extremes. A committee chaired by the poet Vasil Alexandre drew up a petition proclamation addressed to the general population and to the prince. Their overall objective was to install a moderate liberal political regime and to stimulate economic development. Strict adherence to the law by officials as well as citizens was set down as a basic principle of government, unmistakably a reference to the corruption and arbitrariness of Sturza's authoritarian regime. Rules were then outlined for electing a new, more representative assembly with increased powers, including the right to make proposals to the prince on all matters affecting the general welfare and to examine all government ordinances concerning public affairs and judicial administration before they were put into effect. They urged the creation of a national bank to facilitate commerce, and the abolition of all tariffs harmful to agriculture and commerce, also making a general plea for an improvement in peasants' relations with landlords and the state. While committed to reform and good institutions, they did not intend to overturn the country's existing political and social structures. Sturza received the petition proclamation on the 9th of April and agreed to 33 of its 35 points, rejecting those that concerned dissolution of the General Assembly and the formation of a National Guard, also, it appears, objecting to the abolition of censorship. To his surprise, the movement leaders demanded acceptance of the entire petition. Sturza withdrew to the army barracks and that evening took steps to crush the opposition. Several people were killed in brief fighting and some 300 were arrested. Among those who fled, either to Transylvania or Bukovina, were Alexandru and the young officer Alexandru Ioan Cuza, who would come to rule the United Principalities in the 1860s. Sturza, now bent on permanently halting all dissent, made anyone even suspected of opposition subject to arrest, imposed strict censorship, and had students returning from France stopped at the border and interrogated before being allowed to proceed. The Moldavian movement and its Wallachian counterpart alarmed Russia, which in late March had warned Sturza and Prince Gheorghe Bibescu that armies would be sent across the route if changes were bonded in the organic statute system. The threat emboldened Sturza to resist the liberals' demands. In April, after the ISI petitioners were scattered, Tsar Nicholas sent an aide, General Alexander Demel, to investigate the situation. In ISI he urged the prince to make a few modest concessions to defuse the situation, but the latter rejected any move toward liberalism. Cernotti. Meeting in Cernotti, Bukovina, Moldavian liberals formed Comitatul Revolutionar Moldavian and commissioned Mihail Kogălniceanu to draw up a new statement of principles. Dorintel Partide Nationalist in Moldova, published in August. More liberal than the 9th of April petition, it called for an elected assembly with extensive powers, including the right to initiate legislation, and expanded the local autonomy of Județ, cities and rural communes. Kogălniceanu also drafted a constitution, Proiectul de Constituție, which rendered the legislature the dominant branch of government, allowing it to vote taxes, draw up the annual state budget, stimulate agriculture, industry and commerce, reform laws, elect the prince, and choose the metropolitan and bishops of the Orthodox Church. Kogălniceanu, a future Prime Minister of Romania, proposed that all orders of society be represented in the assembly, without calling for universal suffrage. Instead he proposed the creation of electoral college, giving the upper classes predominant power. Like most of his colleagues, he felt obliged to remain mindful of his era's social and political realities by recognizing the boyars' continued leading role and limiting the participation of peasants due to the lack of education and experience. Aftermath. On the 7th of July, Russian troops entered Moldavia in order to prevent the establishment of a revolutionary government similar to that in Bucharest, but did not cross into Wallachia until the 27th of September. Military administration lasted until the 1st of May 1849, when the Convention of Balta-Liman was signed with the Ottoman government and restored joint Russo-Turkish control over the Danubian principalities. The powers installed Grigore Alexandru Gheorghe as the new Prince of Moldavia in 1849. He was close to the reformers and in 1848 supported their liberal program. The selection was mainly due to Ottoman Grand Vizier Reshid Pasha, who was impressed with Gheorghe's moderate liberalism, which he believed would promote a stable administration after the preceding year's turbulence. Remaining sympathetic to the liberal agenda, he not only allowed a number of revolutionaries to return home, but brought many of them into his administration, including Kogălniceanu, Alexandru Ionescu de Lebrad. He introduced important administrative reforms and promoted economic development and education, but eventually lost sympathy from the revolutionary leaders for failing to change the peasantry's status of broad and middle and lower class participation in political life. Bibliography. Keith Hitchens, The Romanians, 1774–1866, Oxford University Press, USA, 1996.